welcome to another episode of the CEOP. I am Dave Osh, the CEO of Varlinks that sponsors this show. We transform the invisible human drives that inhibit business performance in high complexity. Our purpose is to evolve leadership effectiveness so that together we create a ripple effect of unity in the world. The CEO Peak Show is devoted to sharing the thought leadership of successful leaders of mid-sized companies. Such a leader is our guest today, Brady Harris, the CEO of Dwolla. Dwolla is a FinTech company that develops payment gateway software that changes the way innovative businesses move money. Brady joined Dwolla almost a year ago after serving as the president of PayScape for almost 3 years. Before that, he scaled the corporate ladder over more than 16 years from various sales positions to the president of Elliott Management Group. Brady has 2 bachelor's degrees in international and economic studies and in Russian. He has a master's degree in international affairs and global enterprise, all of them while working at Elliott Management Group. He was on mission to St. Petersburg in Russia for 2 years before starting his corporate career. Hello, Brady, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for that introduction. Great to be with you.
You know, as a former CEO of an e-commerce company, I would love to talk to you about payment solutions. That was really one of the biggest pains we had when we had lots of subsidiaries and need to connect to a lot of payment gateways in many, many countries. So that was one of our maybe number 1 or number 2 challenge in e-commerce. But we will leave it to another chance because we're going to talk about leadership. But before we dive in, if you just kind of quickly explain what actually Dwolla is doing in a show that everyone will understand, what is like FinTech mystery?
Yeah, I'd love to. Dwolla is one of the original, mostly B2B payments companies. And what they do, they've created some API, so code that developers, programmers can take and integrate, do a direct integration into an app or into their software. And what essentially it does is it creates a portal or rails to move money from point A to point B. So if you think of Stripe, Square, companies like that, we compete in some ways directly with them. We're complementary in others. We have a lot of customers come to us and say, I'm building an app that is for the gig economy, right? Where we want to allow our contractors to send and receive money with their customers. So we provide our API. They get access to the ACH rails, and we can do some pretty customizable things. We've worked with companies like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, companies like the Johnson & Johnsons of the world, and then we have a lot of tech startups. So we added about 1.5 million new net users last quarter. We'll probably do about 25 billion in gross payment volume this year. So really exciting company, great growth, and lucky to be part of the team here.
So it enables more customization than like the typical Stripe. Let's dive to the leadership topic that we want to discuss today. And, one of the things that you mentioned in our last call is like about delegating or talk about steward delegations in the company. So what does it mean when you say that like you are actually delegate ownership? What does it mean?
That's a great question. I personally find so many parallels in between. In my case, being a parent, I have 4 children, and from a leadership standpoint and how you interact with those that you have stewardship over, right? Those that we work with. And there's a lot of parallels there. Earlier in my career, as I think back to ways that I either was a manager or a business leader, oftentimes, I would try to go about enacting change or motivating teams or driving success in the organization through what we commonly refer to as micromanagement, or gopher delegation is another term. Task management is another corporate buzzword. And so I've made more mistakes than I think I've gotten it right in my career. And as I reflect, right, on the younger version of me, the mistakes that I made was not empowering the right people to make the business decisions that were commensurate with their role or what they were tasked with in the business. And that either out of a sense of fear or a lack of control, that proved problematic over time, that employees disengage when they don't feel empowered, when they don't have the autonomy to make decisions or to have their voice be heard. You lose their heart in the work. And oftentimes employees have the best opinions. They have the right solutions to the business. And I've learned that, leadership is more so about organizing the collective genius and the talents of those that you work with, and less about having the answer yourself. So at the core, when I talk about stewardship delegation from a leadership standpoint, it's this idea that you entrust parts of your job to somebody else. You ultimately leverage the skill sets and the talents and the abilities of those around you to focus on the parts of the business that are most important. And I've learned it sounds easy, but poor delegation is, I think, one of the key reasons why a lot of organizations don't either achieve the results they want or they don't ultimately reach the potential they could.
I fasted backwards a few years, like 10, 15 years, as a control freak. I'm not sure I would have thrived in that environment, and I'm sure that many people are like me, like wants to have things my way. And so very hard to let go and delegate. So how do you create this alignment when you have people of all types? Some of them are love control, some of them like okay with that. How do you make this transformation to that culture?
Yeah, my personal story is, I think it was through some failed endeavors from a management and leadership standpoint that I've learned how to do that. I was brought into an organization and in a previous role, the business was ready to really start scaling revenue. We knew we wanted to do some kind of transaction, whether it was an IPO or private equity. And as I worked with the existing founders to really come in and professionalize the business, one of the things that I was hopefully bringing value to the business in was the ability to standardize right business processes and put in scalable, repeatable aspects of the business that would allow us to grow revenue or to scale operations. And I came in, I think, more so from an autocratic standpoint, feeling like you had the mantle or the weight of having to make the decisions and to have the playbook defined. And what I learned over time was that even if I had the right answers, if I didn't build the relationships and build the trust with the existing organization, kind of like an organ transplant, you can be exactly there to save the patient's body, right? You can, from a leadership standpoint, be that critical heart transplant, but you run the risk of the body rejecting you if you don't do it the right way. So that alignment question is super important. And, that parental parallel or leadership in general, there's a couple steps to stewardship delegation. I think the most important one is that you mutually define with the individual, or it could be a department, what the ideal outcome looks like. So from a parental standpoint, I have a 14-year-old son. And like most 14-year-old boys, he's not the best at keeping his room clean. And instead of me coming down and saying, pick up that shirt or, fold the towel, make your bed, and more so task managing, I sat down and we spent time together in discussing why it was important to have a clean room. And we talked about what the definition of a clean room is. And he was part of that discussion and trying to formulate, the idea of a clean room and what it meant for him. And so when you put a lot of time and investment on the front end of describing in vivid detail what that ultimate outcome is you'd like to have with an employee or a child or a department or an organization, that's a critical step to having them have an active voice or to be a participant in the larger process of stewardship delegation. Because you've established a reference point, right? You've established under mutual agreement as to what we're trying to collectively achieve. That, to me, is a really good opportunity to drive alignment and buy-in that you're going to need in later stages of the process as you then hold people accountable to the outcomes, or as you support them, right, in that body of work.
I was exactly 8 years ago. In that time of my daughter was 14, trying to get her buy-in to organize her room, her space. Complete failure. Not only I didn't get a buy-in, but actually I got exactly the opposite. Eventually we locked the door and nobody entered there, nobody cleaned. It was impossible. And me, as a control freak, I wanted everything to be so organized. And after a few years, I learned that she really performed pretty well in this chaos. So I just let it go. So how do you adjust sometimes when you don't have the buy-in? You want to have this alignment. You still want them to perform well in their own different capacities or different way of operating, which is sometimes you won't get the buy-in.
Right. Yeah, it can happen. I've found that most employees, if not all employees, they want to feel empowered. Right. Very, very rarely does in this case, a coworker or an employee say, "Hey, I'd like to be micromanaged. Tell me exactly what to do and how to do it, and don't let me think for myself." So in my experience, it drives a high level of engagement, buy-in. People are emotionally vested in the work, proportionate to the degree to which you involve them and that you empower them and provide autonomy. When we talk about stewardship delegation as a general leadership philosophy, there's a couple really key critical steps. The first one is, as I talked about, is establishing in a mutual way what the results should look like. What's the outcome that we're striving towards? And then the second step is it's equally important, and that's guidelines. So while the manager or a parent shouldn't dictate the methods for accomplishing the goal, it's important that he or she explains the parameters that they need to operate within so that the team member doesn't, right, unknowingly violate rules or SOPs. That can obviously hinder a team's, confidence and their sense of empowerment. So educating the employee, empowering them, helping them to understand what guidelines exist as they go about pursuing the goal is really important. And then at the heart of your question is resources. The third step in stewardship delegation, and just as a disclaimer, I'm borrowing much of this from a great author, Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Big fan of his work. And he speaks about, right, stewardship delegation is one of his concepts. So the idea of establishing resources is asking team members what they need, what resources should be made available to them to accomplish the task and to be successful in achieving that goal that was mutually defined and created. That might be manpower, money, it could be technology, it could be support from the organization. But making sure that you ask the question from a resource standpoint, and then, however appropriate, providing those resources is really kind of that final key step to driving alignment and making sure that that employee feels empowered. After that, you're in the clear, as they say. It's that the subsequent steps are about accountability. So making sure that there's opportunities to regularly review the work, to check in on how you might be trending towards the goal. It's providing an opportunity, right, for them to report back on their progress or maybe roadblocks they might be hitting. You're not there to solve it for them. You're there to just from an accountability and structure standpoint. And then ultimately, it's about enforcing consequences and accountability. And that could be both positive and negative. So team members, it's really important that they have a clear understanding as to what are the consequences of success. It could be a financial bonus, it could be a job promotion. It could be a lot of different things, increased opportunities in the business. And conversely, what are the consequences for failure? What if we're not successful? So that is a general pattern, right? These 5 steps to stewardship delegation, if applied, becomes this flywheel organizationally to where I've seen cultures become increasingly autonomous, empowered. They're emotionally vested in the work. And those are just such important things, right, to create high output teams. And it takes time, but consistently, And I think mindfully trying to apply that pattern over time, I've had a lot of success in empowering teams that help them, right, ultimately drive the organization forward.
I can borrow a great quote from you. Nobody signed up to be micromanaged.
Yeah.
And nobody tried to attract talent by, look, we're going to micromanage you, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So before we go to the next, can you wrap up and summarize quickly the 5 steps so we have clarity how to do that?
Yeah, we'd love to. So the first step would be establishing results, co-creating, right, what the goal or the outcome should be. Step 2 would be establishing guidelines. The third step would be to provide and establish what resources are necessary to be successful. The fourth one would be accountability. And that's really providing regular check-ins and giving an opportunity for the employee to report on their progress. And the fifth one would be consequences or accountability, both positive and negative, to achieving the outcomes that was mutually agreed upon.
Cool. That's really beautiful model. Results, guidelines, resources, accountability, and consequences.
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful. So have you noticed any different way to deal with this structure among generations at work?
Yeah, I know we're cautioned to try to characterize or generalize, but I've seen some emerging patterns, even with my own children. I mentioned a 14-year-old. I have a 16-year-old, so I need to get your parenting notes to see if I can stop messing up as a parent. But I've noticed even with my 16-year-old, her friends. I've worked a lot with the millennial generation. I'm right on the border personally of Gen Z and millennials, so I get to stand in both camps. But I have seen that there are certain characteristics of employees, especially the newer generations and the newer work groups entering the workforce. It's been so fun, working with some of these younger groups. There's an incredible sense of, buy-in and authenticity that employees generally of that demographic ask for. And if properly harnessed, and if the business culture is such that can encourage some of the things that are important to those groups, for those demographics, you can unleash so much potential and power for an organization that is just amazing. One of the things that I've been really mindful of in my current role and in previous roles, and this isn't really specific to any, demographic or age range, but the degree to which you can be transparent, empower employees to make decisions, provide autonomy, recognize those that are performing well, that is just such a great recipe to empowering the right people and creating the culture that, is ultimately going to drive the business forward. So accountability, transparency, all those like buzzwords, I think are important.
Yeah. And, you mentioned something that is so true, that having kids sometime you can see the trends of the future workforce. And even when they're in high school, and I see it in my daughter, her boyfriend, my kids, and everything that you mentioned about it, the buy-in, the authenticity, I can see in this generation.
Yeah.
Something else that I really loved is like that you don't separate, and you see a lot of similarities between parenting and leadership. And when we work with CEOs and C-suite leaders, we want them to expand and stop these barriers that we have between home and work, and think that we are different personalities at home and at work, and start to see leadership as something that is very expansive to our relationship at home. And parenting is such a great example. So it's really powerful to see. The aha moments is that when you find that everything that actually the behaviors at work is actually an extension to the behaviors that we have at home, but we think that we are in different contexts, so it's not the same, but it's actually similar tendencies, right?
So similar. Yeah. In fact, Forbes did a recent article that was really great about, managing millennials and how to engage in demographics that might be different. You and I were probably raised under similar circumstances where if a boss or a parent said do something, you didn't ask why, you just had to do it. right? It was through brute force or maybe more autocratic in nature. And so it's an interesting observation that even that type of management style that was previously very top down or very autocratic is not very conducive to an engaged workforce today, or engaged children for that matter, But, this article Forbes wrote, and certainly what I found is, things like providing opportunities for individuals to grow, realizing that money is not the sole and only motivation in terms of where employees might pick, or might pick from an employer standpoint. The idea that you're a mentor more than that you're a boss, strong company culture, or in the case of a parent, a family culture, recognizing that there's a inherent need, a human need for recognition. There's so many, to your point, parallels that I think are really powerful if you can understand some of those recurring themes from a leadership standpoint or from a parental standpoint. There really are some correlations there.
Yeah. I'm more than 60 years old and my parents still expect me to follow exactly what they want me to do. So,
me as well.
Talking about different generations, here we go. So it was such a beautiful conversation, Brady. So anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to have the discussion. As I said, I've made more mistakes from a leadership standpoint than I've gotten it right. But as you know, it's a sacred opportunity to, have the success of others sometimes in your hands and on your shoulders. And that's a heavy mantle. But I know for those of us that have been in leadership roles, and I know you'd agree, it's a great opportunity and it's a great experience. I'm just grateful for it. So thank you for the conversation today.
Brady, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Dave. It was a great conversation and appreciate the invitation to be part of it.
And thank you for watching the show, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.